Is there such a thing as free will? And if so, how should we as spiritual people proceed knowing that we are free to create our reality? And if not, how should we proceed knowing that we can't miss our destiny? So the opposite of free will is what they call in philosophical circles determinism. Determinism is this belief that all of the events that we experience in life, all of the choices that we make, are ultimately determined by causes that are external to our will, such as the year we were born, the community that we were born into, the family we were born into, our access to resources, our religion, our culture, et cetera, et cetera. And as we move through our life, if we hadn't been born at that time, in that family, with that set of resources, we would not have been able to take advantage of certain opportunities and make certain choices that have ultimately cascaded into the life that we have. And I would say that there are merits to that from a ground level perspective. But from a spiritual perspective, which means we want to zoom out and look at it through a broader lens, before we even come into this life, spiritually speaking, we choose when we want to come into the life, what kind of family we want, what the characteristics of our parents are going to be like, what siblings we're going to have, what opportunities we're going to be afforded, et cetera, et cetera. So in a way, we freely choose our circumstances that we're born into, but then once we get born into this life, a part of the process is we forget all of that. And all we can recall as we continue to grow up in this human experience is the stuff that happened after we were born. So this is all by design. And I think that's one of the reasons why Einstein said there are only two ways to live your life. You can live your life as though nothing is a miracle. In other words, determinism is the answer to why this is happening. Or he said, you can live your life as though everything is a miracle. In other words, maybe there are some influences that are beyond what we can see and smell and taste and touch and feel. Maybe there's something that's happening on a more esoteric level, and that's also governing some of the experiences that we're having and perhaps even influencing some of the choices that we're making. A guy named Dr. Brian Weiss talks a lot about this in his research in the life in between lives. There are all kinds of reports of near-death experiences and more esoteric subjects that tends to affect people across the spectrum. You even have someone like Steve Jobs. Famously, the last words that Steve Jobs uttered as he was lying in his deathbed were, "Oh, wow, oh, wow, oh, wow," indicating that he was seeing something that other people could not see. And of course, there are all kinds of reports of people going to this other place with this light at the end of the tunnel and being met by some relative who passed away earlier, and then given the choice to come back and complete whatever your lessons were on this plane of existence. All that to say, there's no scientific evidence that there's free will, but there's also no scientific evidence disproving free will. And so in that sense, we get to choose what we want to believe about this. Now, I'll share some principles from this perspective, and like anything else that I share, if it resonates, feel free to adopt that or to explore it further. If it doesn't resonate, then that's fine too. At least you have a point of reference for what some people believe to be true when it comes to this perspective. So from the spiritual perspective, we come into this life for a very specific purpose. And that purpose is to learn how to love. Now, in Western society, we may say, oh, I love pizza. We may say, oh, I love my husband or wife, or we may look at our pet and say, I love my pet. And so we're using the same word to indicate a very strong feeling for all of these things. And so the limitation that we have is that we only have this one word which applies to all of these other things. But that said, let's give the word the ultimate meaning of something or someone that we care deeply about. So when we say we're here to learn how to love, that effectively means we're here to learn how to accept ourselves as well as to accept others for who they are. And a lot of the concerns around love, am I giving too much? Am I not giving enough? We could say that that's all really cultural. Like we learn how to think about love through our culture. It's not innate within us. When we look at children, we see that children are very joyful. We see that they're very curious, that they tend to operate with a sense of wonder. So we could attribute those qualities to love as well and just say that love is the process of becoming more and more present, to becoming more and more connected to where we are and to what we're experiencing, because that's what we see when we look at the youngest people on the planet. Before they get indoctrinated into whatever culture they happen to be born in, and they get taught what love is supposed to be and what love is not. But at its essence, that sense of wonder, that sense of curiosity, that sense of connection, that sense of presence, we could say that's our default mode. So when I say we're here to learn how to love, what I mean by that is that from a spiritual perspective, we're here to learn how to become more connected again. We're here to learn how to become more present again. We're here to learn how to make the journey of life the destination of life. We're here to learn how to be more curious again, just like we were when we were children. And we're here to regain their sense of wonder. So let's expand the definition of love beyond just romantic love or feeling obligated to someone unconditionally and include those other attributes. So who doesn't want to feel more curious or have a greater sense of wonder or feel more present or feel more connected to whatever it is that they're doing in their life? So that's our default mode, right? How do we know? Because again, that's how we behave in the beginning of our life. And then oftentimes that's how we also show up at the very end of our life. It's just like the palliative nurse, Bronnie Ware, that was looking after all of the dying patients over years and years. And she came up with the top 5 regrets of the dying. Number 1 is, I wish I had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life that others expected of me. Number 2, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. Number 3, I wish I had the courage to express my feelings. Number 4, I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends. And number 5, I wish I had let myself be happier. So you could say that all 5 of those are rooted in love, and it could just be love for oneself. But if you look at the end of people's lives, usually they evolve in their understanding to the point where one of those resonates deeply with them. And again, it's an expression of wonder, curiosity, presence, and connection with what is. And I used to have this belief that if something was meant to be, you can't screw it up. But if something is not meant to be, then there's nothing you can do to make it happen. And that's kind of the conundrum of life. Because again, from that spiritual perspective, when we're born into this existence and we forget about the fact that we chose the life that we were going to have, the big challenge is we don't know until the very end of life what was meant to be and what wasn't meant to be. And if some activity that we tried to make happen was supposed to actually be a part of our path and purpose, or if it was just supposed to be a character building exercise. So because that's a conundrum, we want to go back to Einstein's quote, which is, there are only 2 ways to live your life. One is as though nothing is a miracle, and the other is as though everything is a miracle. So in those moments, I choose to believe that the thing that I wanted to have happen that didn't happen was a part of a miracle, meaning it's a part of an experience that I can't really explain why it's leading me in the direction that I'm supposed to go in order to learn how to love more. But I'm just choosing to believe that, even though I have no evidence for that being the case. And so the most constructive thing that I can do for myself in that moment is just to be present to what's happening around me right here and right now. Conversely, the most destructive thing I can do in that moment is to yank myself out of the present moment and to start being regretful, to start being worried, to start being disagreeable with how my life is turning out, et cetera, et cetera. Because all that's doing is introducing more chaos, which is making me less present, which means I can't see some of the opportunities that are surrounding me in this moment. And from that spiritual perspective, we're always surrounded by opportunities to advance or to evolve or to learn more or to grow more. And in life, we can look at the entirety of the universe kind of like a video game, meaning it's sort of like a framework with laws and rules that we kind of have to abide by whether we want to or not, such as the fact that a human being can only live around 80 years, give or take, at this moment in time. 3,000 years ago, it was only 40 years, but now we've increased it to 80 years, maybe in another 1,000 years, it'll be, 120 years. But there's a finite amount of time that a human being can exist. And in 100 something years, there are going to be all new human beings on the planet. And then you have physics principles, like the speed of light is the fastest that we can go as far as we know. So that's a limitation, even though it's incredibly fast compared to an airplane or to a car or any other thing that we've invented. If we invent a way to go to another galaxy within a year or two, by virtue of the fact that we go to another galaxy and we experience different gravity, by the time we come back to Earth, millions of years will have passed. I'm not a physicist. I don't know exactly how it all works, but I know that gravity causes time to behave differently in different parts of the universe. And so that's also a restriction. Time is subjective, right? Everything is made up of the same elements: helium, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. It's just different variations of those same elements. So those are the rules of the video game of life. And they create the limitations, which then creates emotions based on the stories about those limitations. Hey, if you've been knocking your head against the wall when it comes to daily meditation, falling off the wagon, getting back on, not quite sure if what you're doing is working, don't worry, I got you. For a limited time, I'm giving away my signature 7-day meditation kickstart for free to you, my Spiritual Perspective listeners. Plus, you'll get a free 2-week all-access pass to my entire Happiness Insiders online curriculum of challenges and masterclasses, which will provide you with a crystal clear roadmap for mastering your inner work. You'll also get support directly from me and accountability and a place to ask questions. And you can join me live for a meditation on each of your 2 free weeks. So with zero cost to you, you can get a daily meditation practice that you'll actually enjoy and look forward to doing for the rest of your life. And you'll have me to personally support you and hold you accountable. And after your 7-day meditation kickstart ends, you can start the 108-day meditation challenge and get even more support. And you can take as many other inner work challenges and masterclasses as you can fit into those 2 weeks. We have an unheard of 80% completion rate for our challenges, which is over 20 times higher than your average online course. So if you've been feeling stuck and inconsistent when it comes to your inner work practices, you will not find a better solution anywhere online. Go to thehappinessinsiders.com and let's get your meditation practice up and running today. That's thehappinessinsiders.com, and you can tell that nagging daily stress to kiss your ass. I'll put a link below in the description. If you saw the movie Interstellar, the Matthew McConaughey character watches his children grow up rapidly while he's only gone for a few hours. Years are passing in the life of his kids. He's crying as he's watching the videos of his daughter and his son. He's missing so much of their life because he knows there's only a finite amount of time. And those emotions are based on the story that he's telling himself. And so this all plays into that love equation that makes up this idea of free will. And so within any video game, you are free to do whatever you want to do as long as you're willing to suffer the consequences of that action that have been pre-built into the framework of that particular universe. And same with life. You can ignore the fact that gravity exists and you can jump off a building, but there's a consequence to that. Or you could ignore the fact that the average human only lives to be about 80 years old, and you can spend most of your life worrying and being regretful. And there are consequences to that. Once you get older in your life, you look back and you have one of those regrets of the dying. But from a spiritual perspective, you're free to spend that time however you choose to spend your time. And you could also make the argument that your purpose is truly going to come alive when you're 70 years old, and you're going to spend the last, however many years contributing to society in some way that is a direct result of feeling like maybe you didn't spend the first 70 years in a very constructive way. So we just don't know. We don't know why things are happening and the way that they're happening and how it's affecting us, but we do know that there are a set of limitations and there are stories based on those limitations. And so that's what we can manage. That's what we can control, is how we relate to those stories and what we can choose to do in this moment to be as present, to be as curious, to have as much wonder as we can cultivate so that we can feel as connected as we can to the moment, so that we can minimize those regrets as much as possible. And that's what the love experience ultimately is about. We have endless scenarios for learning how to do all of those things. And you may be thinking, well, Light, what about people who are being sex trafficked? What about people who are still in modern day slavery? What about people who are victims of war? And did they choose to have those experiences? Again, I don't know, but I do know from that spiritual perspective, we all feel drawn to certain paths in life. It's not exactly the same thing, but it's kind of like when you go on your streaming service at night, Netflix, Amazon Prime, whatever, and you want to watch something. And we've all had this experience where you're just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, and there's literally 1,000 options, but you don't see anything you like because you've already seen Shawshank Redemption. You've already seen Interstellar. You've already seen something about Mary. You've already watched this stand-up comedy bit. You've watched the Breaking Bad series. You're no longer as curious about that kind of experience. And you may not even want to watch another movie that's kind of like that experience. You want to watch something completely unique. And so from that spiritual realm where we're choosing the kind of life that we want to go into, a lot of times we'll consider going into a romantic experience, going into a dramatic experience, a thriller, a comedic experience. And based on what we've experienced in the past, if you happen to believe in reincarnation, that's one of the spiritual principles, you may not be as curious about just having a normal life in the suburbs and having all this comfort and having all these access to resources. You may want to have something a little bit more adventurous and more intriguing. And so I'm just being extreme here, but maybe you sign up for the sexual abuse or the slavery, or you get caught in war or famine, and you have experiences in those scenarios that allow you to continue to evolve and to further develop your understanding of love by being on the other side of the comfort, by being on the other side of the happiness or the fulfillment. And so you get a more well-rounded picture of what these experiences can be like, because at the end of the day, this is not who we are. It may seem like who and what we are is fully this human body, but from the spiritual perspective, after you pass away, Ram Dass actually said it best. He said, it's kind of like taking off a really tight pair of shoes. We've all had that experience. You come home, you take off your shoes, you take off your clothes, and you're like, oh, I feel so relaxed now. I can just be myself. And so that's what returning to the spiritual realm is apparently like. So we choose the scenarios that we feel most curious about, and we end up getting whatever we came to get, regardless of how it looks from the outside. And the good news is that it doesn't have to match anybody else's idea of what you're here to do or what's right for you. You have to kind of self-source that information, again, by tuning into what you're feeling internally. And generally speaking, the things that feel most aligned to you, most curious, most wondrous, most connected, the situations where you feel most present, those are the things that are going to help you evolve the most along your path. And so that's usually the game of life, is to overcome the temptation to go after the glittery thing or the shiny thing, or to do what society indoctrinates us that we should be going after: success, material achievements, comfort, etc. And to instead go for the thing that makes us feel the most connected and the most present, and that we feel like we can use to create the most impact. And what's standing in our way usually are scary scenarios, like I'm going to end up broken alone, or if I do this, then no one's going to like me or appreciate me, or if I do this, then I'm going to fail and I won't get any recognition, or some other fear like that. And it kind of reminds me of this Massive Attack video. There's a music group called Massive Attack, if you didn't know. And one of their most popular songs is called Angel. And the video is this guy who's being chased by a small group of people, and then the group of people that's chasing him continues to get bigger and bigger. And he's running down alleys, and he's running through fields, and he's running through buildings, and he just can't seem to get away from this group of people that's continuing to get bigger and bigger. And then at the end of the video, he finally runs into a brick wall. He has nowhere else to go, and he turns around and he finally faces this group of people, and they all look kind of menacing and sketchy. And since he has nowhere else to go, he decides to start taking a step towards the scary people. And then something really interesting happens. As he's taking that step towards the people, they take a step back, and he takes another couple of steps, and they take another couple of steps back. And then he realizes that him moving towards the people is going to cause those people to start to dissipate. And that's kind of like what happens with our fears. We get chased by our fears a lot in life because, again, that's what society indoctrinates us to do, is to be afraid of all these things. But when we put ourselves in scenarios where we can't run away anymore from them, and we turn around and we truly, truly face them, and we start moving in the direction of them. And I had this experience when I went nomadic in my 40s. I gave up everything. I sold everything. I just had a backpack, and I didn't know how long that was going to last or how I was going to sustain myself, but it just all worked out, and it lasted for many years. But you have to face your fears, and that's what free will is really all about. You're still in the universe. You're still in the video game. You still are subject to the rules, but you can always choose to turn around and face the fears, face the challenges, take the leap of faith, say yes to the thing that feels aligned, but it's very, very scary. And when you do that, that's where you can sort of reignite that sense of wonder. You can cultivate the presence, you can cultivate the connection, and you can reignite your curiosity. And so the biggest spiritual takeaway around learning how to love is also coming to the realization that the fears aren't real. No matter what happens to you in this life, once you go beyond the life, you take off the tight shoes, and you're back home. And this is the 30,000 foot view. So that's the spiritual perspective on free will. If you want me to comment on a specific question or topic, put it down in the comments. Make sure you're subscribed. Oh, and I've got a 30-day free inner work kickstart that you can join right now. I pinned the link in the comments. So sign up for that, and you'll get a prompt from me to do just a little bit of inner work each day to help you build up momentum in your daily inner practice. If you like this perspective, there's another video that I made called Why Life Feels Unfair. And if you want to see the entire playlist of spiritual perspectives, you can click here and you can just go through and see which episodes or which topics resonate with you the most. Thanks again for tuning in.